What if your next blog post or article, not a memo or a brief, was what brought people to your law firm? You're listening to the Real Lawyers podcast, and I'm Kevin O'Keefe of LexBlog. This podcast is for lawyers and legal professionals who use blogging and other publishing to build a name for themselves, to build relationships, and build a strong book of business. In today's episode, we'll look at what it really means in practice. How lawyers are using blogging and other publishing to establish authority and to grow their reputation online. And who better to talk with on this than Ed Walters, the co-founder of Fastcase. He's a chief strategy officer of vLex's and a true pioneer in legal publishing and access to the law. And I'll confess, a real good friend of mine. So let's get started, Ed. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very, very welcome. Why you and legal publishing? I mean, it's not like when you're in kindergarten and somebody says, I want to be a fireman and I want to do this or whatever. You didn't say, I want to be a legal publisher. How's this all come about?
Well, first, I'm a giant book nerd, a huge bibliophile. Like, I love books. I've got books everywhere. You can't see them, but if you look on the front part of my camera, there's books on the floor, there's books in stacks all around me. So I love books. And I think you know this. I was a writer when I was in college and then for a little while afterwards. And so I got to do like a little bit of work with like print publishing, working for the Washington Post and the New York Times. For my college paper. And so I got to see publishing really from the ink on your fingers, very ground level. And so I've been passionate about it for a long time. I love that we got to do some of this at Fastcase by standing up our own imprint called Full Court Press.
Right.
Based a little bit on the Malcolm Gladwell story, if you know it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think, between digital publishing, print publishing with newspapers, print publishing with books, and then my own geeky passion for books, I've always been surrounded by it in some way. And I love being able to make it one of my professional passions as well.
And my guess is you've introduced your son to the world of books, whether it's going to bookstores,
gosh.
libraries, whatever.
My 17-year-old has a well-worn library card and is a huge book nerd as well.
Yeah, it grows. You probably hung out in libraries. I want to go see the library in this town when I'm in it, that type of thing. I do that. I love books. I love books. I don't read them all cover to cover, but I have a wall full of them from going to used book sales and whatnot.
I've started rescuing like old books too, like really old ones, and especially old legal books, which I love.
Yeah. So as opposed to animals off the street, you're getting the old books that need to be rescued from somebody.
That's right. I'm adopting orphan books.
When you were talking to me about, Washington, D.C., where you went to school, and then we started talking about jobs, like first jobs. I knocked on doors in law firms in La Crosse, Wisconsin while I was getting ready to take the bar because I was going to go back and practice in California where I already passed the bar. I asked you what you were doing. I think you said you went and knocked at the White House or something to that effect. What was that? What was that whole story about?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, my first real job was mowing lawns in Louisiana in the summertime, which I quickly turned into earning enough money to buy a computer so I wouldn't have to mow lawns
Right.
in the Louisiana heat. My first job after college, I was trying to brainstorm at the end of the summer between my sophomore and junior year of college. I was living in DC and I was thinking about what a difference it made to apply early for that internship. I got to intern for the Washington Post that summer, which was awesome. So I had played Trivial Pursuit like 3 weeks before. And the question was, what's the switchboard number for the White House? That just stuck in my head, 202-61414, And so I picked up the phone and just cold called them, and the switchboard operator answered. And I said hey, do you guys have internships in like the press office? I worked in the media. I wanted to work in government. And she said, hold. And I thought she would come back and say, look, we don't. Or,
Boy, kid.
Yeah, go away, kid. But instead, the person who came back said, this is the Office of Media Affairs. How can I help you? And I said, sorry, I wasn't, I'm very embarrassed. I wasn't trying to reach out to you. Well, they had connected me to like the head of the Office of Media Affairs. At this time, like Marlon Fitzwater is like, number 2. but the person who ran press for the White House um, wasn't supposed to do that. And so I explained why I was calling, and she said, "Wait, you're calling about an internship for like, a year from now?" And I was like, "No, no, I'm just trying to figure out if there is an internship." And she said, "Why don't you come here tomorrow and interview with me?" And I did, and you can't imagine how nervous I was, but I said, like, this is a Republican White House. I'm kind of a centrist Democrat. I just want to say that up front. She was like, "Well, kid, you're going to be taking out the trash, not like setting foreign policy. It doesn't matter if you're a communist, right?" But as it happened, my first day of work, the summer between my junior and senior year, that office had been fighting for a bunch of writing work, which they won, but their lead writer had just quit. And so they had all of this writing work to do and no writers. And so they said to me, like, "You're the one who worked for the Post last summer, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." So, "Well, can you write something like on a deadline?" And Kevin, I've told you this before. You can't imagine how eager I was as like a, 19-year-old rising senior in college. I was so eager to prove myself. And so I went like above and beyond as a writer. And they said that, "Okay, this summer, you're not taking out the trash. You're going to be like the writer and the ghostwriter for, the executive branch. Anytime we're writing op-eds or anything that's going to be written, you'll write it." And then when I got to stay in that job through my senior year in college, and then when I graduated, they said, "We're going to make you a political appointment. We're going to, we're going to make you a political appointment to the Office of Presidential Speechwriting." I was thinking about this. I might be the last Democrat who is politically appointed to the White House under a Republican president.
There you go.
I don't think we do that anymore.
Yeah. And when you were saying, "Can you come over tomorrow?" And I'm thinking of, other than being a caddy and mowing some lawns, my first job, and I couldn't wait to get it, was knocking on the door, calling the grocery store. And it turned out that somebody had been hurt in an accident and they needed somebody that night. And they go, "Can you come here now?" I mean, like, and I'm hearing you say, "Can you come here tomorrow?" I'm thinking, I went down to the small mom and pop grocery store. You went to the U.S. White House. You went and said, "Hello, I'm Ed Walters." They had to check to see if it was true. And you went into the White House.
Yes.
I went into.
I mean, I also acknowledge, like, this was like a very fluky good luck thing. I was determined to make maximum advantage of this lucky break. But I mean, it was just, it wasn't because I, had some connection or like, great qualifications for the job. It was just very good luck.
Not everything is. I mean,
Right.
Most of things happen as it is because of fluke. I happened to turn 16, so that now was the time that I could go get a job, a real job, and get paid about $1 a buck. And I made damn sure they thought I was going to be the hardest working clerk that they ever had in that store.
It makes a difference though, right? I mean, and look at you now. Like, you're still like one of the hardest working people I know in this industry. You're the most connected lawyer in America, probably in the world. And it's like elbow grease every day. I love it.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes you're not up on your luck. Sometimes you're down on your luck, and different things happen along the way. You went on to found Fastcase, so we don't have to go all the way through that. How did that all come about? And I know you and your co-founder Phil Rosenthal very well.
Yeah.
I would call you guys friends, but how did that all come about? Where you guys you're both working at Covington then?
Yeah, we were at Covington and Burling. I was splitting time between Brussels and DC. Phil and I had like opposite experiences. So Phil, my co-founder, Phil Rosenthal, I mean, the word genius gets thrown around a lot, but there's very few definitions of the word genius that don't include Phil. He had a PhD in superstring cosmology from Caltech, a physics degree that takes like 7 years to do. He did it in 4. He was Stephen Hawking's TA. I mean, he actually worked at JPL as a rocket scientist. This Pluto, a fast flyby, New Horizons thing, Phil worked on that when he was at Caltech.
I laugh. I'm laughing because you go Rosenthal. He's kind of this brain on a stick. You'll see him around here. He's taller. He's taller than me. And so I'm talking to this guy, I'm talking to Phil Rosenthal, and I said, I know who you are. And he goes, well, I don't know if we've ever met. I said, you're the brain on the stick. And he goes, what are you talking about? Because that's who you referred. That's who you referred me
Yes.
as
My
far as Phil.
6'3" co-founder, who would never tell you these stories. He would never
Right.
tell you he graduated top of his class from
Right.
Harvard Law School after getting a PhD in physics from Caltech. But so we're at this law firm and I barely squeaked in. I didn't have great grades in law school. I had, some pretty good experiences, but I had this charmed existence at our law firm. I had an apartment in Brussels and I was going back and forth and, sort of professionally drinking beer. I wasn't working a whole lot of hours, but I was the captain of the softball team and working with European regulators, drinking beer with them to figure out how Europe was going to regulate the World Wide Web. I had this super charmed existence with relatively low qualifications. Phil, one of the great minds of our generation, was patenting the shape of perfume bottles and figuring out how much radioactive material you could put in a wristwatch. And was working every night until 2 a.m, 7 days a week. And he and I were next door neighbors and I was never there, after 8 o'clock, and Phil was there every night. And so anyway, one of these nights I got a call from a client who said, we need you to do research. It's too new to be in the books. Don't use Westlaw and Lexis. And I said, what's the problem with Westlaw and Lexis? That's who our firm uses. That's how we find access to the law online. And they said, yes, but we have 300 law firms who do work for us, and they all pass the cost of those services through to us. And it's insanely expensive. And so we don't pay to put the books on your shelf. We're not going to pay to put them on your computer either. Go do it. Do it tonight. Do it online. Don't use the incumbents. And so I've just figured I'll go find out what the third service is and go use that naively. But it turns out there was no third service. And so I'm fuming, for the one night I'm there at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm stomping around our suite pouting and saying, I've got half a mind to go start the thing that I was looking for all night. This is uncopyrightable public domain stuff and the software sucks. Phil says, if you're serious about that, Ed, we should go take a look at that. That's actually a pretty good idea. I think now in this time of the World Wide Web, there's no reason why you could sell proprietary access to things that aren't copyrightable with crappy software. There's going to be a third alternative. We should think seriously about doing it. And so we did. We spent nights and weekends for 6 months building a prototype of it while working at Covington. And then, left in November of 1999. To go start the big alternative, which was kind of a laughable joke for most of Fastcase's history. We were a very scrappy, underdog, underfunded, bootstrapped company. But, if you compound those gains over 25 years or so, over time, we got to be pretty popular. It got to be a pretty big subscription service.
Yeah, you did the right things with relationships with people. Both you and Phil are pretty down to earth. You're pretty, gung ho, run around to meetings, go meet people, have relationships with people. You would do events to welcome in the leaders of bar associations that were using your services to give it to their lawyers. You brought me into that crowd, which made me feel good as a publisher. You guys did all the right things that way. You weren't afraid to do a few crazy things too. I remember asking you how you got books. Well, you put them in the back of a U-Haul until the front wheels until the front wheels go off, or you ship books to China to have them scanned. And it's comical when you hear about this.
It is pretty absurd. But I think you've seen this too, Kevin. If you want to build a .com business to flip, some AI flip or something, you want to just slap a couple of instructions on top of ChatGPT and sell it within 3 years and get out. I suppose that's available to you, but it's very hard to be successful that way. I think it's much more fun and much more interesting to build companies and products that really last, that stand the test of time.
Yeah.
And you've seen this with LexBlog. You've been doing this since 2004? 2004, yeah.
But I kind of started it in 96, 97 when I was trying to build an online community, and I stumbled with the sale of Lexus, into LexisNexis, went the dot-com roller coaster. But the thesis, the underlying idea was the same: to have people share insight and knowledge so as to connect them with people.
But I mean, if you're going to do this for any amount of time, then, you should treat everyone like a repeat player, like you're going to see them over and over again for the next couple of decades, because you are. And the people who you've got the upper hand with today are going to have the upper hand with you tomorrow. And, treat everyone with respect and with interest and with sincerity. I think that's the only way to build relationships over time, and relationships that are worth having, right? Sincere relationships.
Yeah, and sometimes you do something that somebody thinks you didn't respect them, but you didn't mean to do that or whatever. I guess that's just life, and that's business. And we're all trying to figure out a way to at times, like, we got to make the next payroll. We got to continue to grow it. We got all these other demands. We've got families, those type of things. It's an interesting process, but something you just said is real interesting. If you really believe in it, you're kind of in it for the long haul because you're stuck with that belief. Because I've had many occasions where people wanted to buy LexBlog. And after Jill died 5 years ago, my wife, it was like a lot of them did then, because I think I come up on an algorithm of, okay, you're 60 years old now and your wife died, so he's going to be willing to sell. And your head is spinning. You're not sure what you want to do. I could look at it today and say, gee, I should have taken them up. But you have this crazy underlying belief that publishing is still worthwhile, and that what legal publishing has always been was the primary law and the secondary law. And the secondary law was beyond people like me. I may have been contacted by Matthew Bender to write a chapter on how do you use learned treatises to try a case. And I wrote it. And I was quite proud of the fact that I wrote it. And I don't know if anybody had that chapter other than me in their trial advocacy series. But it opened my mind to the fact that people that had experience could actually share insight and commentary. And when the internet hit with blogs, whether you would call it anything, it could have been called any name, I could share. And I could get seen. And this thing was viral. You didn't need to hire anybody to push your content out. It circled around. I met you the day that Tim Stanley, who had founded FindLaw with his wife, Stacy Stern, had previously sold it to then FindLaw. He was going to be cranking up Justine and another, as soon as the covenant not to compete was over, in a coffee shop in San Francisco. I was invited to speak to a group of people on blogs, of all things. I barely knew what they were. I don't know what I was explaining to you. But I get up in front of a room and say, see how you can put copy on the internet. And there was the CMO of Fenwick and West is going, can you see what he's doing? Look at that. And all these people came up. I didn't know who they were. It turned out they were marketing people in large law firms. I wouldn't have known somebody in a large firm if it hit me in the face before that. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah. I mean, and for them, you have to remember too, like, the world before blogging, before you democratized it for law firms, was very IT centric. Like, if you wanted to put anything on that website, it was an incredibly arduous thing. And it required like real coding expertise and understanding HTML and a bunch of things that were very intimidating for marketers and for lawyers. And you were the one who really came through and said, look, I'll make this very easy for you. We'll set this up, and then it'll be like using a word processor. You can make the text look just the way it's going to look on the web, no IT required. And I think it was the introduction to the web for most law firms. They weren't publishing for the first time on social media. It didn't really exist. You were the kind of original social media for law firms.
Yeah, and law firms didn't want to give away their knowledge without charging for it, because I was basically told we're going to have to put up something that causes people to pay for our knowledge. And I said, that's kind of not the way it's going to work.
Pay per blog read, like
you don't ask to get paid when you get invited to speak in front of an industry conference.
Or write a chapter in a book, right?
Yeah, or write a chapter in a book. If you're going out in front of people that are potential clients, you don't say, I'm sorry, I got to charge you $1,000 an hour for my time. It was very foreign at the time. I can tell you, Ed, that even though we're 20 probably 22 years after that date. Um, I'm not sure how far it's advanced. If I want to write a piece of content in a large firm, the person that it now has to be reviewed by is probably somebody that was 5 when
Right.
LexBlog started. And they're
Right.
they're incredibly bright people, but they went to school for marketing. So they're not looking for a piece of insight and commentary that's engaging, that's weaving in stories of experience. They're looking for copy with the right title, the right keywords, the right length. And if it's older than 6 years, we got to get it off the website because it could hurt our search rankings. And I'm trying to explain law is something that it builds on itself. Something that Ed Walters wrote 10 years ago can be very, very good. I'd say in over half the law firms, I don't get very far with that. I don't know whether
Maybe,
you can believe that, but it's true.
no, I do. Maybe I can sort of bring this back to a point that you made a few minutes ago, which is that, blogs are also relationships in a way. Like, they're invitations to a relationship, because it's not the content that's the product, right? Like, a client who reads a lawyer's blog is not reading the blog post and saying, "Oh, well, then my legal matter is now over with," right? Check. I've consumed the product. No, I mean, what they want is they want a relationship with somebody who really knows this well, someone who is trusted, someone who is authoritative, someone who is an expert. How do you figure out who that is? Like, a website doesn't really do that. You can't look at the pictures or the carousel of images,
Right.
but a blog post and consistent blogging about a topic. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, I know, but
Right.
really establishes that authority and is the invitation to a relationship with a client. And that client, she has her own, legal issue and a need for expertise, but also like a need for counsel. And that blog post, you can't read it and replace that. It's not the same product.
No,
And
it's
so that's the thing that I think you really opened up for a lot of law firms, that this is the most effective advertising that you can create, showing your expertise and your authenticity in your voice. And then it will show up all across the places where people are looking for these answers.
and it's the currency of relationships. You don't need a zillion people to look at your insight and commentary. If you're publishing in a niche, there may only be 10 people that you're looking to talk to. And really think about it, you're talking to them. They should be aware of this because I read this in the news and I want to explain why this might be important to them. And I think you and I know that the leading way that lawyers get their work is not through randomly reading content. It's by a referral. And when I get a referral, I look up the person's name. People have figured out that Google works really well for that. And if I look up, Ed Walters or Phil Rosenthal, I'll get their background. And if I look up the name of a lawyer and I see that they actually write on the subject, where it looks like they keep up to speed on the subject and they explain things, I'm probably not going to read one piece that they've ever written, but I'm probably going to thank the person that referred me. And then I'm going to call this lawyer because I'd like to think that the lawyers that I might hire read about the area and pour enough into it to explain the concepts to other people. That's really what it is. What do you see the importance of practitioners publishing today? You're as bright on this subject and have a perspective on the subject that's probably more important than anybody. What do you see
Well,
the role
that's
of the practitioners publishing, whether it's blogs,
expertise.
articles, whatever it is? We don't need to call it the machine that it came with, which was the blog, but what's the
Right.
value here?
I think expertise never goes out of style. And that's that kind of expertise. When computer assisted legal research came out, people said, well, won't need lawyers anymore. You can just run a keyword search. When Google came out, people said, oh, now we won't have any need for lawyers because people will just Google it. And now with AI, this is the same refrain, like, we'll have AI that just replaces lawyers. I think this is the same conversation that we just had about blogging. Like, whatever the output of AI is a product, but it's not the product. When a client hires a lawyer, she's buying more than the text of the answer. And so I think that expertise might be more important than ever at a time where average answers are kind of commodity. What clients really want is that relationship, and they want expertise above the average answer. And there's very few better ways of advertising that expertise than by consistent blogging. And I'll tell you something else, like, you and I worked together on this for man, I don't know, like a decade or
Yeah.
longer. Like I think it's so important that I've been trying to include this in,
Yep.
Fastcase and vLex as long as we've been able to, because, what are those sources of authority when you're trying to figure out what the law is? You can find different cases, but the cases are scattered over time. You can find it in statutes or maybe secondary materials, but the secondary materials are often out of date. And so that kind of currency, specificity, expertise is really in blogs. And not every blog in the world, but like the expert bloggers are more authoritative on stuff than in a lot of cases the treatise authors. And so I've always pushed to try and have that material included in Fastcase and in vLex as authoritative secondary mini treatises. I think that's really
And,
important.
yeah, I was getting frustrated. I couldn't get anything done on these things for years. And I mean, the good news is that you and I, whether it was shortly after Memorial Day weekend, got together, and I said, Ed, I gotta get it. I'm going to lose all credibility with my company if I can't demonstrate that this blogging or articles, whatever you want to call it, can be included in secondary law. And you were very kind to me. We were able to structure a deal now where the content from LexBlog, whether it's going to be blogs, we call it credible and citable articles as well. So it can be single posts, because sometimes we get these submissions from these really bright lawyers, but they don't have a blog. Well, why should we stop them? Let it come in. But that's now going to be included at vLex. And that, for a snot-nosed kid, for me, that's pretty cool.
Well, let me tell you, I think that the real opportunity here is with Vincent AI, because I think that is going to be the front door to law for so many lawyers now. It used to be Google, I think, where you would do a Google search and look to see what ranks really high. And you can look at every statistic in the world. It just shows that kind of search engine traffic is just on the decline. And the traffic for AI is like on the way up. For lawyers, I don't think that there is a replacement for legal AI. Kind of generic foundation models are great for a lot of things. Maybe if you're writing marketing copy or something, it's fine. But like there's no ChatGPT replacement for like real authoritative, law-powered, law-grounded legal AI. So Vincent AI, the tool we've been building at vLex for the last few years, first finds sources through a bunch of interesting AI search, but like actual sources from the database, including blog posts, and then uses those sources to produce authoritative answers that don't require you to upload your stuff into some other database so it stays secure. It's all grounded in real law. It's all hyperlinked. And so there's no hallucinations to it. And when we say like, look, Kevin O'Keefe says in this blog post, X and Y and Z, you can click it and go directly to it and see the original source for yourself. I think this is the frontier. I think there's going to be like a lot of interesting referrals and business and expertise that is created over the next few years with blogs as they are surfaced in Vincent AI and consumed by lawyers and corporate legal departments. It's going to be incredible.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're smarter than me, and you've been a professor teaching AI for how long?
Since
I mean,
2014.
yeah, I mean, so the rest of us, it was all cool, but it was some robot or something, and Ed's talking about the teaching the law of robots. I've got to go over to Cornell. Is it Cornell Institute of Technology on the river in New York? I just wanted to
Cornell
see this.
Tech.
Cornell
Yeah.
Tech, and I'm going, wow, Ed's really teaching this stuff. It's real. I get confused sometimes, like what an LLM is, how you use AI in an environment like Vincent. And because I'm not a scientist and I'm not a technologist, and you may not call yourself a technology, but you have a really good grasp of it better than me. I think lawyers get afraid that somebody's going to take all their knowledge, everything that they've written, and it's going to get absorbed into a machine. So now their ideas and their writings have been stolen. And I'm looking at and there was actually a gentleman that shared something on LinkedIn, and it came up for me this morning because you had liked it. And it was making sure that you make sure it's correct. You have to do
Yes.
that. And I realized that, on Google, I used to just search something and it came up and I kind of took it for granted. Well, I don't do that anymore because I'm now wired that when I find something in ChatGPT, I got to go look at the source. And so I am optimistic. I don't know how it all works, but that if a lawyer writes something and it provides some insight and commentary on a very niche issue, which is where the lawyers are need to go. What AI will do is surface knowledge that's relevant, but they want that source. They want to show who wrote it, and here's what they wrote. I mean,
I totally agree. Yes.
does vLex and Vincent want to work that way, where it wants to show here's what's been written, not we put words in your mouth?
Yeah, it requires to show, right? And so I think this is a big difference between like legal AI grounded in real law and the kind of general foundation models like ChatGPT and Gemini, which
Yeah,
again, like are great. They're great products for certain things, but they are, trying to boil the entire ocean of everything written to predict what the most likely next word is going to be.
right.
And, they want to train that model on everything they can get their hands on, including everything that lawyers write that they can find. At vLex, the task is really different. The task for vLex is to say, look, we're not even training a model, right? We don't have like some Vincent AI model behind the scenes. What we're doing is we're building this database of authoritative law, just like we were at Fastcase, just like vLex was around the world, where we have the original cases and statutes and regulations and court rules and constitutions and blog posts that we're updating every day, right? An army of people are updating everything that happened this morning, right now, for inclusion in those services tomorrow. But then the whole purpose of keeping that database is that we're not just predicting what the next word is. We are finding what the most relevant sources are for anything, kind of like the list you would come up with after several days of Boolean searching on the old way.
Yeah,
But if you did all that research for several days, you might end up with 11 sources. That's what Vincent comes up with. And it says, here's the text of a case. Here's the governing statute. Here's an authoritative treatise. Here's a blog post discussing it. Here's another case. And you put these together to write your answer. And what Vincent does then is it, kind of augments it. It says, use the majority opinion, not the dissent. This case has been overturned. Don't rely on it. There's a lot of kind of editorial work we're doing there. And then passes it to a locked down version of one of the foundation models, right? So it's always kept confidential, never trained on any of the inputs or the outputs, bank grade security, and then creates an answer or a draft or a document or a contract markup. But it's all tied to that expertise. It's hyperlinking the original sources, including that blog post. So I think the difference here is that one of them, the kind of general models, want to learn from you to make them smarter. And the kind of legal fit for purpose tools like Vincent AI are designed to like incorporate those sources, cite those sources, surface those sources so people can read them and verify them, and then kind of work with those sources to create answers that also cite to the original blog post or case or whatever.
so
And I think it's a fundamental difference.
yeah, I mean, I'm listening to you talk about this, and I'm thinking two things. One is I didn't need to be all wigged out about I can't allow vLex to do an LLM, and you're probably thinking, well, of course not. And I'm all wigged out about it, stressed out, sitting in my condo. Wow, am I signing away the rights of these lawyers? No, I'm just trying to get their insight and commentary out where more people can see it that would be helpful to them and help them grow a reputation and let it be more meaningful against the competition.
And set for the future, right? In the places where people are going to look for the next several years.
That's right. And it must have been one of the things that attracted you to vLex, with you and Phil sitting there at Fastcase. I don't know, but
Yeah. So I think, we had done a pretty good job of building the U.S. legal database.
right.
There were some things we were good at, some things we weren't very good at, but we could see generative AI coming, and we knew it was going to be a big deal. vLex was sitting in Barcelona and Miami. Luis Faust and his brother Angel Faust, the CEO and the CTO, now they had gotten to be a pretty big company. We'd worked with them for years. They saw the same thing coming. They saw generative AI was going to be a big deal. They had built a database for like 100 countries around the world, but didn't work in the US. And so it was like puzzle pieces, right? The stuff that we were good at, they were not really good at. The stuff that they were good at, we weren't good at. And then, the other part of it was that the collections fit together. Like the US collection,
Yeah.
they didn't really have it all. We didn't have anything outside the US. And so when we put the two companies together, it was kind of a bet the company move for both of us.
Yeah.
And a big pivot towards generative AI, that this kind of Vincent AI tool would really be transformational. And Kevin, it just was. I mean, this is not me being self-serving. It worked way better than vLex and Fastcase could have ever hoped.
Yeah.
It's amazing when you have like that giant database of law. That's what powers AI, and it powered the hell out of Vincent. It was amazing.
Yeah. I sat in a conference in New York. I forget which one it was, but they had the graphs up about who was getting the most inquiries about their services and solutions. And you had Thomson Reuters was I think the biggest customer base, and LexisNexis was up here with large customer base. Wolters Kluwer and Bloomberg might have been right up there, but vLex had this curve up. And so it was the greatest potential inquiries going on. And I was sitting there thinking, I go, okay, this is a combination of probably AI, but everybody's got AI. But it's got to be vLex's international too. So this international and the AI is very interesting in speaking people's interest. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, is just the snot-nosed publisher. Well, I've got a printing press machine that can, we're the kings of WordPress in the law. We know how to use it. We build all our own stuff. For us to put things up in different languages is nothing. We've done it in Arabic. We've done it in French. We've done it in Italian. I get excited thinking about, is there a time when we can get these printing presses up so that this secondary insight and commentary in the law can be run through vLex, and maybe even through, you've got a definitive agreement with Clio, how this thing can run worldwide, because some countries don't have the primary law like the United States does. I mean, in fact, most of them don't have the primary law. You need to explain the law person to person. And it's going to have to be explained from professor, because there's many young students that graduate from law schools in Ethiopia, but there's no law.
Right.
And the same in countries in Africa. But the law needs to be explained. And the lawyers are willing to share it. There's just not a machine to share it. And there's no way to record it. And so, the stories I get are quite incredible. I get excited just hearing about this type of thing. It's fascinating.
Yeah, we're all beginners. That's one of the exciting things about it. Like, we're all learning for the first time, because these technologies, the oldest ones are like 2.5 years old now, almost 3 years old. And, some of the technologies we're working with are like 6 months old. So like, I'm not an expert. I don't think there are any experts. We're all learning together at this really interesting frontier.
It's cool. It's very cool. And what's weird about it is you're learning together as friends. It's like these are the kids that playing Little League or something, except we've just been playing in the law for the last 20 or 30 years.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And, it's interesting too, because like these relationships we built in 2004, have every bit as much importance and salience in 2025 and 2026.
Yeah, it's true. I'm going to ask you a couple questions about ClioCon, and that's where these relationships even continue in another week, next week.
Yes.
What can LexBlog do more of to help at the bottom? We're working in the dirt. We're working in the mines, getting the content out and get it ready to be on the train and deliver it to people like vLex and other companies. What should we be focusing on, if you were telling us?
Well, I don't think it's so much what LexBlog can do. I think you're already doing it. We've talked about this before. If you reward substantive blog posting about the law by referrals, by corporate legal departments finding the expertise of those law firms, I think people will do more of it. The more we can surface that together for the benefit of expert clients or lawyers who want to refer, or news reporters or people who want experts for a certain area, the more it pays off for people, the more they're going to do it. And that's sort of my ambition for it. My hope is that people will see this and they will write more substantively about current events, about something that just happened yesterday.
Did you care? And a person recently asked me, they said, will those lawyers care about publishing law like that? And do they care about status? Do they care about being included in secondary law, like at places like vLex or Bloomberg or Hein Online? And I go, God, I hope so. Because I not from an ulterior motive from my company. It was just like, yeah, I would have thought it was important back then. I don't know what you would have thought at Covington if you were writing some important piece that was being used for citations by courts and whatnot.
Well, I don't have conviction about everything in the world, but I do have conviction on the idea that lawyers care about status.
And being cited by another lawyer and being pulled up by a judge's status.
Yeah, and if you look at at all the citation metrics, that exist in the world, like SSRN or any of these rankings of law professors and how often they're cited. It's a tooth and nail fight. I mean, they care a lot about whether they're ranked 17 or 18. There are huge fights about these citation metrics.
We will go back to the top 10 then, as LexBlog used to do in the old days. We will go back to the best publishers as they have the best publishers in the community. Talking about ClioCon, you've known Jack Newton for how long?
Since his very first conference,
Yeah.
2008, I think.
Yeah.
I think I met him at ABA Tech Show when he and his co-founder, Ryan Gavreau, had stood up like a, crappy 6-foot table and, one of these pop-up easels.
We have video of that. In fact, we intend to replay it for Jack this year because our new director of operations was actually the radio DJ that put the mic in front of him and said, "Jack, who are you, Jack?"
That's awesome. But I think it was clear. It was clear to me. I think it was probably clear to you that they were really onto something. And it wasn't that much later. It was 5 or 6 years later, 2013, 2014, that they held their first ClioCon, which you were at, right?
Yeah.
I think you were. The very first ClioCon was a much more modest affair, but there was a palpable sense that something very different had just started. It was different from every other legal conference in the world. There was a different energy to it. And even today, there is still a different energy to it.
Why do you think that is? Because I get asked the question from people, even in large firms, and they're thinking, well, we're not told to go to Clio like we are to go to, other large conferences. What's different about it? Because I can describe what's different. What do you think?
Okay, so I'll start with the programming. I think it is one of the most thoughtful conferences in terms of what they're trying to teach and what track. I think it is very centered on the attendees. Jack wrote this book called The Client-Centered Law Firm, but I think Clio is very client-centered about the people who are attending, thoughtful about what the day looks like, about scheduling time between the sessions, about the social events and the opportunities to mix with each other. So I think they're first extremely thoughtful. Second, I think that a lot of legal conferences are still caught in this CLE model of programming. Recent events in the law of beekeeping or whatever, you have like this person running through these really boring slides. Clio has always been about, here is how to know whether you're running a more effective law firm and how to optimize for these things, right? So how to run a better business, how to be an entrepreneur, because a lot of small firms are entrepreneurs. They're standing these businesses up themselves, but no one tells you in law school how to run the business. How do you effectively get new clients? How do you make sure they pay their bills? How do you know you're, charging the right amount? And Clio obsesses about these things. And so I think there is a different kind of programming that's amazing. And then the last thing is it sort of self-selects. I mean, the people who go to Clio are entrepreneurs at heart. They are passionate about making things better. They're optimistic in a way that attendees of other conferences aren't. And so I think that there's a real find your tribe element to it too, where people know they're not in it alone. They see other people from other parts of the country and the world who are pushing against some of the same problems and trying to make the practice of law better for their clients, for the business, for their families. And so I think that self-selection piece is not trivial. I think that the people who attend, not just lawyers, sometimes it's also other people who provide like legal software, but they're not hawking. They are peers, And so I think it's really some combination of those that makes it special. But to this day, I mean, I'm not saying this because we're in the process of becoming part of Clio. I would have said this a year ago or 5 years ago or after the very first one. There's something very special going on at that conference. It's super intentional and amazing.
Selective, though, is an interesting thing because they are optimistic. These are optimistic entrepreneurs, and some of them should have no reason to be optimistic, but they do. They're sharing the same plights, the same problems that every other law firm does, but they're seeking something different, and they're finding it with the people there, their peers, and they're finding it with the message that they're receiving. Last question. I mean, what does Jack mean to it all?
Well, I mean,
As an individual, his
yeah,
personality. I mean, you know him as a good friend.
I do. Yeah, I think Jack is an incredible leader in the space, like a visionary. He is someone who is, God, I hope this doesn't sound sappy, but he's extremely true-hearted. So he is really sincere in a way that very few people anywhere, not just in legal tech, but sincere in a way that very few people are. He really has a way of seeing things before everyone else does. So he's visionary in that way too. He saw cloud computing for law firms as a game changer for small law firms, but for big law firms too, at a time where it was heretical. But he knew it was inevitable, right? When no one even thought it was possible. And he was completely right. Same thing about AI.
Yeah.
He's been talking about AI in law firms as long as anyone has. At the time that he was talking about it, it seemed like ridiculous. And of course, it is actually inevitable, so I think Jack is really visionary in that way too. He's just an incredible leader too. I mean, he is the kind of person who really inspires other people to follow him. He's the kind of person you'd really want to follow into battle, And so the team at Clio is extremely loyal to Jack. The Clio subscribers are extremely loyal to Jack. He's an amazing, effective, visionary leader.
It's true. And nobody even knows the full story about how he almost went into AI and machine learning if he didn't go to Clio.
Jeff Hinton, the father of AI, tried to recruit him to go to the University of Toronto to be in a very small class of people to study with him.
Yeah, when I asked Jack and Tanya one night, what if not Clio? Where were you going? To the University of Toronto to do this, what you just described. And then I'm reading the book, talking about the wizards of AI. And I'm going, my God, that's why Jack is enthusiastic about AI. That started 20 years ago, before all of us knew he saw all this happen. It's been great to have you on board for this. It's been a real pleasure and an honor. So that's it for today's episode of the Real Lawyers Have podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and share it with another lawyer who cares about the craft of the law and publishing. The Real Lawyers podcast is brought to you by LexBlog, helping lawyers publish with purpose and build a name that matters. I'm Kevin O'Keefe. Thanks for listening and see you next time.